Holy shrimp, that's epic!
It's reaction time!
My fellow Reploids, we are now reacting to another one of my friend's videos, RC Apologists videos, Mr. Brass Wisdom on Christianity, Refuted. Before I commence the video, I did see a little bit of it yesterday, just the intro portion of the video, because we'll get to that once again after starting the video. But before that, please make sure you take a minute to subscribe to RC Apologists. I'm going at his channel in the credit section description below, the comment section pinned, and the outro of the video. And with that said, let's go to Rose's clip. We shall see how it goes. It's been a long time, my good man. Wrong clip now.
RC here, and I'm going to go over a few points that were brought up by a man who apparently likes to block people who differ in his ideas and simply for following him. I have never even
I've seen his tweets regarding this matter, and of course it's been getting rather old.
This is what I get.
Not him, but
so perhaps it
this
would be better
guy,
to just respond to his
and many other people who
against
block him.
Christianity in one of his videos. So let's go right on in and tackle the man known as Mr. Brass.
I cannot get over this intro. Let me just chill.
The video is going to be of him criticizing David Wood's testimony.
Mm-hmm.
If you want to see the full video of his, feel free to check the description box below and
I'd rather see your point of view, my good man.
click on the link for that. But before we get to some of the serious stuff of his, let's examine some bits, specifically one of the more serious statements he makes.
I agree that life is objectively meaningless, but I think your assessment fails to take into account that really meaning of life is just a description of how we inspect current events,
And
our
how is that just a
emotional relation
description?
to them, and how to survive as a group with one another in that scope of reasoning. Now, I'll remind you that there are a lot of atheist philosophers who hold to objective morality, Sam Harris as the most obvious, and if you loosen the definition of philosopher.
So if life is indeed meaningless, why should we do anything? If it is
Indeed.
just examining current events, our emotional relation to them, and how we survive, then this presupposes purpose. Why
Yes.
should we examine these events, according to Brass? Why should we survive if there is no ultimate meaning in life? The very fact one still affirms the meaning of life in some regard is still evident here.
Right.
If there is a subjective and objective meaning to life, in terms of the perspective that exists where there is meaning subjectively and objectively, then why should subjective be encouraged?
Indeed.
Wouldn't objective universal truth be something we should desire instead of opinions? If it's something because, like, we feel better than we make our own reasons up, then that's like me
Good
kind of
question,
saying, you know,
sir.
I would rather believe 2 + 2 = 5, when in reality it equals 4.
Indeed.
Also, when you mention Sam Harris and he claims that he's a follower of objective morality, I would agree that he claims to, but he can't consistently defend such a view from a naturalist, materialist perspective. Next, let's take a look where he goes against the Gospel of John.
During this time period, you're reading the Gospel of John, aka the
Gospel
latest
of
of
John.
the Gospels, and the more mythical one where Jesus' divinity is reinforced.
I do not see why the Gospel of John, being the latest Gospel, is a
Neither do
problem to
I.
us. First of all, it was likely written between 40 to 50 years after Christ. In fact, according to D.A. Carson in the Zondervan Study Bible of the NIV, he says, quote, "But if we must
It's just
suggest a
that
date
when
for
John
when
wrote the fourth
John
gospel,
wrote
we
the
may very
fourth
tentatively
Gospel, we may
advance
very
80, 80,
tentatively
85.
advance 80,
One of many
80,
reasons is to
80,
allow for some
to
time
85.
between the writing of
One of the
John's
many reasons
Gospels
for this
and
is to
the
allow for
writing
some
of his
time
three
between the
letters, which
writing of
were
John's
probably
Gospel
in the early 90s,
and the
which
writing of
combats
his 3
and
letters,
simply
which were probably written in the early
form
90s, and which combat an
Gnosticism.
insipid
Gnosticism.
form of Gnosticism and respond in part to a Gnostic
Misunderstanding of the
understanding
fourth
of the fourth
Gospel.
Gospel. Another point is mentioned by one of the world's leading New Testament scholars, Michael J. Kruger, in which he says these points on a similar dating for John's Gospel on page 119 of his
We would
introduction
not
to the New
expect John to
Testament.
have
We
been
would not
written
expect John
immediately
to
after
have been written
87. It would have
immediately
taken
after
some
AD
time for
70.
the impact of the
It would have
temple's
taken
destruction
some
to be
time
felt
for
in
the
the
impact of the temple's
diaspora.
destruction to be
And
felt
for
in the
that-
diaspora.
Oh,
And
diaspora.
for that
my bad.
impact to result in mature theological
So
reflection
reflection of the
about the
relationship
relationship
between
between
Jesus
Jesus and the temple.
addition,
In
John's
addition,
more
John's
explicit
more
language.
explicit language regarding the divinity of Jesus fits more
Sorry
closely
for
with
reading
what we
along
see in Ignatius,
with him.
and thus
I know it's
suggests a date towards the
discombobulating,
end
but
of the
my
first
apologies,
century.
guys.
So if it is about getting historical reliability and accurate information, then we must doubt some important information throughout history. For
Right.
example, the earliest biographies of Muhammad is by Ibn Ishaq, and this was made 118 years after Muhammad's death, and is still a recommended biography for Muslims and historians, though there are modern ones that also base their work from Ibn Ishaq. Another example is the major hadith collections like Sahih Bukhari, which was completed in 846 AD, where Muhammad died in 632 AD. So at least 200 years later was when this set of hadith was compiled of various oral sayings by Muhammad. Yet not many people deny or doubt the existence of Muhammad, or that a good bit of the information in these late sources even happened. It is because of this that you have people like Robert Spencer and even some liberal Muslim scholars, especially in Germany, believing that Muhammad was nothing more than a fictional character. So
which
right?
he was not.
Well, let's kind of use a more modern example, since some people won't prefer to go to sources like that or an example like that. The Vietnam War has video footage of the war itself occurring, but what about the individual stories that actually occurred there from the people who have been there? Well, we know that the war ended in 1975, yet there are eyewitness accounts of the war from survivors that have been written later. One of these latest examples, since that's the comparison in terms of the Gospels, since John is the latest, is Rufus Phillips, who wrote a book called Why Vietnam Matters, which was published in 2008. That is a 33-year gap, at least, if we start from the end of the war in 1975 and go to the time that it's been written. But that's only including the year of when the war ended, not during the entire time of the war. So it doesn't even include 1955, of which the war would have started, probably. So when it comes to dating, I think the Gospel of John is much more early in its later composition compared to the works of history on other events. Then you have the mention, of course, of the Christology of Jesus. It's not just John who emphasizes heavily on the deity of Christ. In fact, one essay by Keith Thompson on the reliability of the Gospel of John mentions that the Q source, an unknown early material of which is theorized that Matthew and Luke utilized this source when writing their Gospels. According to Keith, he says the following, quote, for example, in a Q statement found in Matthew 3:12 and Luke 3:17, John the Baptist presents Jesus as the eschatological judge who gathers his wheat into the barn, but the chaff he will burn with unquenchable fire. The Baptist is hearkening back to the Old Testament text where the wicked are destroyed by God with fire like chaff in judgment, such as Psalms 83, verse 13 to 14, Isaiah 29, verse 5 to 6, and Obadiah 1:18. Thus, in this primitive Q saying, Jesus is identified as the Lord God who judges and destroys the wicked in the fire like chaff. Not just that, but one of Brass's favorite scholars, Bart Ehrman, even says that John isn't the only one that refers to Jesus as God. In an article he wrote in 2014 called Jesus as God in the Synoptics, he states the following, quote, "This, I believe, will be my final post on an issue that changed my mind about while doing the research for how Jesus became God. Until a year ago, I would have said and frequently did say, in the classroom, in public lectures, and in my writings, that Jesus is portrayed as God in the Gospel of John, but definitely not in the other Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. So yes, now I agree that Jesus is portrayed as a divine being, a God-man, in all the Gospels, but in different ways depending on which Gospel you read. So if he uses the argument about the much more reinforced divinity aspect in John, there is a reason for that in the text. For one, John is writing to those who are already familiar with the divinity claims in Christianity and the other Gospels that are, of course, mentioned as well. So John is therefore writing to believers. Two parts to this is in establishing an accurate translation of John chapter 20, verse 31, which tells us why John wrote this Gospel. So number one is D.A. Carson's translation and understanding, which Michael Kruger supports this interpretation as well. In an essay by D.A. Carson, he believes the best translation is that, so you may believe the Messiah is Jesus, versus the reverse order being that Jesus is the Christ, or is the Messiah.
Yes.
This makes more sense if we do it in the form that is known as the Messiah is Jesus, since he is referring to people who are in an age with heretical sects popping up, which also tend to distort the meaning of the Messiah message and who exactly is the Messiah. Secondly, David Pawson offers the following.
John's Gospel was written for believers. He says that at the end of the Gospel. It is not written to unbelievers. It is the worst of the four Gospels to give to an unbeliever. We're just doing it because we hope they'll read as far as chapter 3 and find that they must be born again. But why did John write this Gospel 60 years after Jesus died and rose again, and after Matthew, Mark, and Luke had all written Gospels? Why write another? He says, I'm writing to you so that you may continue to believe that Jesus is the Son of God. By 60 years later, people were coming to all kinds of notions that Jesus had not been fully God or that he wasn't fully man. They were coming to a notion that was very like the Jehovah's Witness notion of Jesus, that he was a creature and not the creator. And so John wrote his gospel to say to believers, Jesus was fully human. He wept at the tomb of Lazarus, and he was fully divine.
He is.
And
He's
there are
definitely
7 witnesses to the fact that
Very
he's the
divine.
Son of God, and 7 miracles
Omnipotent too.
greater than in the other Gospels that point to his divinity. And 7 statements beginning with I am, which is God's name. I am the living God. 7 witnesses, 7 miracles, 7 statements that Jesus was fully and is fully God. And the word believe in John's Gospel, forgive this, I'm not showing off scholarship, is in a special Greek tense of the verb called the continuous present tense. And it always means to go on doing something, to continue doing it.
Indeed.
Without fail. And John says, I've written this gospel so that you may go on believing that Jesus is the Son of God, and
Indeed.
going on
A very
believing
precious
you
Son
may
of
go
God.
on having eternal life. And John 3:16, properly translated, reads like this: For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever goes on believing in him will never perish, but go on having eternal life.
So David Pawson, along with D.A. Carson, both help us to elaborate this for a translation.
This is legitimate
That
right
these
here.
are written so that you may continue to believe that the Messiah is Jesus, the Son of God, and that continuing to believe
Precious
you
Son of
might
God,
have
yes.
life through his name. So far this sounds like a polemic towards false teachings and an assurance towards fellow believers. So obviously, why would John's
I am a
Gospel be
believer.
written for believers to learn of something and
Because
they
I
are
believe in the
familiar
holy
with?
men up there.
The deity of Christ, and Christ being the Messiah. However, this still doesn't stop that some people today
That's a new expression I
still
hadn't
learn
seen before.
of the
My
gospel
apologies, but
from this
being
particular
real.
one that still contains historically reliable truths. Now then, let's examine now this claim on the knowledge of God's existence.
The reason why atheists say a brick wall is designed and not life isn't because of its complexity, but of the fact that we have prior knowledge. The reason why we say a watch is designed is due to the fact that we know people build watches, and we know people go into the making of these things. We don't have similar prior knowledge with things like life.
While it is debatable on the authenticity of the argument from the design for God's existence, we can still establish that we know that there is a created God that exists, and that everyone knows that a creator God exists.
Must take solace in the
While
facts.
Romans 1 is quite
of
clear
that.
in what it says concerning everybody knowing God exists, there is a scientific paper that has been done on the matter that proves this. There have been
We take
reports from
solace
other
up,
atheist
you know.
scientists in opinion articles that the idea of atheism might not be a legit thing anymore, as noted in articles by Science 2.0. However, in an article entitled "Atheists Become Emotionally Aroused When Daring God to Do Terrible Things," we see that people react emotionally in a way that shows the reactions are the same ones as religious people. In fact, the study says that at one point, quote, atheists were less comfortable with daring God than with daring a more nebulous and impersonal fate, or simply contemplating the distressing events. However, don't just take it from me. Here is inspiring philosophy on the paper.
A recent study found that atheists become emotionally aroused when asked to dare God or strike them down, suggesting that subconsciously they do believe in a higher power, even if they consciously do not admit it. In the first study, Reading the provocations addressed to God increased atheist emotional arousal more than reading neutral statements about such things as sleep and weather. Second, God's statements resulted in equal tension among atheists as reading the offensive statements. For example, it's okay to kick a puppy in the face. Third, the same pattern of results was obtained for religious individuals. The results indicate that compared to their conviction and responses on the self-report measures, atheists' implicit reactions to the God statements were more similar to the reactions of religious individuals. When reading the God statements in Study 2, atheists experienced greater emotional arousal than when reading the offensive statements. Moreover, when reading the God statements, atheists' emotional arousal increased as much as did religious individuals' arousal. Atheists also refused to say aloud the God statements, and they felt the need to undo the statements equally often as religious individuals did. Although neither group refused to say the statements very often, or retracted statements very often. In other words, one may think that they don't believe in a God, but that doesn't necessarily connect to a true repressed belief they have, or that belief may be present in their mind even if they're consciously not aware of it.
Now let's look at this wild assertion from him.
Now, you are better than Jesus in many ways. You're better educated, you didn't betray your family's religion by being a part of a heretical cult that allowed yourself to be worshipped, and you haven't, for as far as I know, bought into the idea that the world is going to end in your followers' lifetime. Take that as you will.
I shall take it as I will. The fact is, Mr. Brass, that Jesus did not betray his family's religion to follow a heretical cult. That again is an assertion one must make after already presupposing a worldview, in this case the deistic worldview. As far as actual Judaism in the time of Jesus' day, this would have been the continuation of it, since Jesus was the Messiah as mentioned earlier. He allowed himself to be worshipped because Jesus proved himself to actually be God manifested in the flesh, based on the accounts in the Bible of the miracles he performed and certain things which were said and done.
Yes.
When it comes to the end of the world occurring during the follower's lifetime, you are going to have to be more specific there, since nowhere does the Bible teach that, and I have gone over the atheist claims on the issue over several passages of Scripture. Lastly, look at what David Wood says, and then what Brass responds with.
It was Jesus or nothing. If anyone has God's stamp of approval, it's the guy who rose from the dead.
So you discounted all the other religions out there? Also, if that is the only two choices out there, then I think I prefer nothing. I take more of a position that
you
people
prefer blocking
initially
him
believe Jesus spiritually
to
rose
avoid
from
the
dead,
indignation
but due to the
or a disagreement of your
culture of
points,
the time mixed
pretty
in
much.
with Jesus' unorthodox teachings and perception, him rising from the dead was changed to be physical rather than spiritual. It was really a legend that changed over time, just like that of Paul Bunyan and Robin Hood.
Notice how he starts with saying that he would choose nothing if it came to Jesus or nothing. He has made up his mind that he is against Jesus at this point. Now, he mentions the whole spiritual resurrection theory that has been used by skeptical scholars.
He's our guide, like
one that has
the other holy men
popularly
up there.
made this one known is Richard Carrier, a person that I think he does not really like. So the very irony that Brass is using a sort of Richard Carrier type of argument for the resurrection being spiritual kinda sounds ironic to me. Anyways, I will not go over this myself, since Inspiring Philosophy addresses this among many other claims to prove a physical resurrection in his own series. So check that among the other things I go to cite in the description below for the links. I'll simply finish by saying this. It is hypocritical for Brass to want to help defend Christianity, as he's claimed in the past in his videos, and the Bible in some aspects and times, but only to attack it later. That's like saying and occasionally showing signs of love towards your wife, but eventually to turn around later and beat her up and stab her in the back as if she was nothing but garbage. It is because of this hypocrisy that I believe Brass and his supposed wisdom, quote-unquote, have been exposed. This has been RC Apologist. Take care.
Until next time, my good sir. Well, this man, you've done very well. You have won this boxing debate. So, everyone, that concludes the video. I react to Mr. Brass's wisdom on Christianity Refuted, composed by RC Apologist, and I hope you guys did the reaction to the fullest. If you guys did, as always, smash the thumbs up button, it keeps me going. And make sure you subscribe to RC Apologist and go down his channel in the credits, comments, and the outro of the video. If you guys are new to this channel, otherwise, make sure to subscribe for more content. Make sure to follow on social media. Also join me on Twitch, where I live stream on Fridays, Saturdays, and of course on the holidays. If you want to join, I can leave the description below. And don't forget, as always, to share because of care. God bless every single one of you at the Utopia and on YouTube. With that said, the more to come soon. This is Silverreploid CLE. I love you guys to the fullest. As always, I'll see Reploids and awesome believers in the next video. Stay blessed.
If you haven't already, please make sure to click the bell symbol located by the subscriber count. Just one click away, and boom! Hi there Reploids, this is Silverreploid CLE. Wanted to take the time to say thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, and if you want more content, please subscribe. Don't forget to follow my social media for more updates, and in case you missed it, please check out my previous video or any video displayed, and please give tons of love and support. I look forward to seeing you at the Utopia, my dear Reploids.